All right, I'm here with Ben Parker from the Bulwark to talk about one of those important stories that still somehow flies under the radar. Ben, you know, one of the rules of life and newsrooms is it's a constant struggle between the urgent and the important, right?
Of course.
Right. And usually the urgent wins. And yet, when you're talking about an escalation between two nuclear powers, it's a bad idea to ignore it, right?
I would say both urgent and important in that case.
One would think. And yet, Vice President J.D. Vance asked about rising tensions and indeed military strikes between India and Pakistan. Initially, took the classic, neo-isolationist, non-interventionist take, saying, well, it's really none of our business. But that's kind of a problem, especially when those strikes continue to escalate. And then we saw reports the administration was sort of scrambling behind the scenes to mediate a ceasefire, which seems to be tenuously, maybe, probably not holding as a result of alarming intelligence, namely that Pakistan had actually convened a meeting in which they were figuring out the thresholds for nuclear war. Again, did not rise to the level of a Qatari Air Force One. That's a very big deal, both urgent and important. But it really didn't break through the spin cycle nearly enough, including apparently the vice president's sense of what constitutes a serious potential international incident, right?
Yeah, I want to highlight here what he said on Fox News on Thursday and exactly how careless he was with his words. First, the context is that J.D. Vance has been a major emissary of this administration to India. He was just in India recently. He met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Well, look, we're concerned about any time nuclear powers collide and have a major conflict. What we've said, what Secretary Rubio said, and certainly the president has said, is we want this thing to de-escalate as quickly as possible. We can't control these countries, though. Fundamentally, India has its gripes with Pakistan. Pakistan has responded to India. What we can do is try to encourage these folks to de-escalate a little bit, but we're not going to get involved in the middle of a war that's fundamentally none of our business and has nothing to do with America's ability to control it. You know, America can't tell the Indians to lay down their arms. We can't tell the Pakistanis to lay down their arms. And so we're going to continue to pursue this thing through diplomatic channels. Our hope and our expectation is that this is not going to spiral into a broader regional war or, God forbid, a nuclear conflict. But sure, we're worried about these things. But I think the job of diplomacy, but also the job of cooler heads in India and Pakistan, is to make sure this doesn't become a nuclear war. If it happened, of course, it would be disastrous. Right now, we don't think that's going to happen.
People hear, oh, they're not going to get involved. What does get involved mean? I have no idea. But it's not a reassuring way for the vice president just to be spouting off in the middle of, as you pointed out, what may have been a very close brush with the first use of nuclear weapons since 1945.
Any brush is too close. First of all, let's just state, and let's even put aside J.D. Vance's emerging unfortunate opposite Midas touch. Right, he visited Pope Francis and. That didn't end well for Pope Francis, although we are, I think, heartened by the presence of the first American Pope. It's an amazing thing. Now, J.D. Vance's wife is of Indian descent. That is itself a great milestone that should speak to perhaps a greater awareness or appreciation for the region, its history, its struggles, and how fraught and violent it is. And yet, as you say, the VP just sort of brushed it off. He seemed to indicate this is, none of our business. And then, after receiving what the New York Times called reports of alarming intelligence about potential escalation, well, the administration did what American administration should do, which is not try to intervene militarily, but intercede diplomatically with a great deal of intensity, using the leverage we have. That is not this vice president's instincts, and it's not the movement he leads instincts, but that instinct, history would suggest, can lead to very bad places.
Yeah, people who study nuclear weapons and the history of nuclear weapons have this term they call nuclear learning, where a new country gets nuclear weapons and they think that it's going to make them all powerful and invincible and they can do whatever they want. And they slowly figure out that actually it's a lot more complicated than that. And a lot of times nuclear weapons make things harder rather than easier. And it feels like J.D. Vance did a little bit of that just this weekend. You know, he said, oh, well, we're just going to stay out of it. We're not going to get involved. And then he saw an intelligence report. oh, actually, maybe we should be involved. Maybe it's actually really important that the United States, actually does have interest in whether India and Pakistan are going to nuke each other. And, maybe we don't have to send troops, but maybe actually sending some messages would be useful, some carefully constructed messages, not just spouting off on Fox News. It almost reminds me of Signalgate, where we got to read the text messages he was sending in that Signal chat with former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. And he was saying, well, okay, we can do this strike on the Houthis in Yemen this one time, but, in the future, I don't really think we should be letting the Europeans get away with, doing this for free. And it almost seems like his inclination, as you called it, toward neo-isolationism keeps on bumping up against like the actual facts of the world. And he keeps on having to engage in actual sort of policy actions that violate what he says because, the world doesn't work the way he thinks it does.
Right. Ideology tends to slam straight up against reality. And that's where responsibility comes in. And indeed, being a responsible world power is not the same thing as being the world's policeman. It's realizing that mitigation is a lot cheaper than trying to clean up things after the fact once they've gone to escalate into dangerous places. And in fact, one of the incidents we saw was an expansion of attacks beyond sort of targeted strikes around this contested region to military targets, which then the Pakistanis apparently were afraid there was an effort to decapitate at least part of their nuclear arsenal. This is a worst case scenario. Again, any studying of history, read the Guns of August if you need to. And these are about, conventional non-nuclear states. But it's when things are allowed to drift and slide that they get past the point of no return. This is the role of reasonable and responsible powers. And it's got nothing to do with ideology. As a matter of fact, ideology usually makes things worse because it puts sort of blinders on. That it forces you not to deal with facts or context or the lessons of history. And that's how history repeats itself.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it almost makes you wonder if J.D. Vance, who has sort of this chameleon-like shapeshifter ability as a, give him credit where it's due, as a very skilled politician, if he actually maybe does believe some of what he's saying, and if he really does start from the proposition always, we shouldn't be involved, we should let other people take care of it, we, should just, never look beyond our borders, and, the Atlantic and the Pacific are going to protect us from everything. And if he is constantly in this mode of being told, well, actually, no, this stuff all really matters. And he also strikes me personally as the kind of guy who, thinks he's much smarter than he is, thinks he's more knowledgeable than he is, always thinks he's the smartest one in the room. And I would never claim to be an expert on India and Pakistan, but if you don't know the history there and you're not willing to listen to people, you're going to get in trouble really quickly because that's a very complicated situation.
Sort of definitionally, but again, I mean, first of all, he's clearly a smart guy. There are a lot of different kinds of smart. Mm-hmm. I think, and you should always take people at their word, especially in the context of a campaign. Listen to what they say repeatedly. I think this is one of the things we've learned in the wake of the 24 elections. Some people seem to be surprised that Donald Trump is doing what he said he would do. And yes, we know they said he'd never even heard of Project 2025. And then after the election, it was, oh, just kidding. Of course, we're going to implement it. But there are plenty of other things like, tariffs that he was perfectly frank about and frankly didn't break through because it didn't seem urgent, though it was very important. So take people at their word. J.D. Vance does seem to represent a kind of neo-isolationist strain that has not served America or the world well in history. When countries when powers try to withdraw from the world, they create a vacuum. Usually bad guys fill it. And then chaos ensues. And then it's more difficult to gain your footing back. I'm kind of a West Wing nerd. I don't know about you, Ben. Are you?
No, I've actually never seen an episode of The West Wing.
Okay, first of all, that's damn near a firing offense, man. That's terrible. Really? All right. I fully appreciate that Aaron Sorkin isn't everybody's jam. I cop to the fact that I am a fan of The West Wing. And there's a great episode called Lord John Mulberry where this character played by Roger Rees, who plays a British ambassador, comes in and basically offers some half-drunk but deeply erudite historic perspective on the region rooted in the British Empire's experience, and basically said, applying whatever you know now, even to a relatively young power like the United States, I'm emphasizing the word relatively, doesn't fly unless you understand the larger forces. And this is one of those cases where, and the clip's worth pulling up and watching, if only because it's so damn well written and acted. But it's just one of those reminders. Harry Truman said, the only thing new in the world is the history you don't know. And when people in positions of great power and responsibility don't know their history, it's at everybody else's great detriment.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, there you go. I was like being in radical agreement. Ben, thanks for joining, man. All right, we'll keep our eyes on the important as well as the urgent, because, that's what we should do as humans and as Americans.